So I made a film about Trebitsch, and then it occurred to me perhaps you need a refresher on Mr. Trebitsch Lincoln. So here it goes. On the eve of the 1880s, Ignaz Trebitsch is born. When he's almost 18, he runs away to London, then to Germany, where he works his way up Bible College. He lands in Canada in 1900 as a missionary and is made a deacon. Then he's bored and goes to London. He spends a year as a reverend in sleepy Kent, but he's bored again. He's taken on as a personal assistant to C. Robin Rowntree, who lets him tour all over for research in Europe on behalf of the government. Trebitsch becomes an MP for Darlington for a year. He sets himself up as an oil magnate. He lands heavily in debt. The war breaks out. He tries to join the Secret Service, both for the British and the Germans. The Brits discover his double dealing and he flees to America, where he tells the world he is a great spy. After a daring prison break, he's recaptured and extradited to London. He allegedly meets Roger Casement in prison. In 1919, he travels to Germany and befriends a group of anti-Semites. These men are plotting the Cat Putsch, and Trebitsch becomes their press secretary. Afterwards, some of them seek to unite all of disenfranchised Europe into a great army which will revisit the terms of the Versailles Treaty. This falls apart when he discovers one of them plans to kill him. He steals the incriminating plots and tries to sell them, only to wind up in prison again, accused of forgery. Upon release, he flees to China and perhaps becomes an advisor to two warlords. He becomes disillusioned with this when a mission to fund Chinese-European trade falls apart. In 1925, he has a road to Damascus moment. Trebitsch becomes the Abbot Shao Kung. It's only one of 24 pseudonyms, but it sticks. He becomes a bodhisattva and a cult leader. China is his home, but he is forever obsessed with returning to Britain, where he is barred, and Tibet, where entry is controlled by all the governments he has pissed off. In 1941, he makes a final bid by way of pitching his services as a Nazi propaganda agent. He is rebuffed, not without incident. 2 years later, he dies in Shanghai under mysterious circumstances. That's the story I've been telling on Patreon and rough draft novel The Watch Thief. I put together this video for the chance to talk about a number of rumours and half-truths that didn't make it into the book. I take as a starting point an article from New Dawn magazine by Richard Spence. It sums up many of the things other people have written about Trebitsch's life which border on the authentic. I made sure these films were a unique contribution and of interest, so I hope you like it. Welcome to the Trebitsch Lincoln Conspiracy Theories, Part 1. Part 1 because there are quite a lot of them. Trebitsch's story is fertile ground for conspiracy theories, as he draws a wide trawl of iconic events and names. His behaviour has given rise to terms like mercenary and subversive, terms which are fluid and subjective. And those stories which Trebitschologists didn't come up with were likely begun by Trebitsch himself. Let's begin with the biggest conspiracy theorist bait of them all. Dropping the R-bomb. From Self-Made Villain by Lampman Sazasny, page 3. Theory 1. Trebitsch was a Rothschild. Trebitsch's mother, Julie, was the daughter of Solomon Freund, a relative of the Rothschilds. When Bernard Wasserstein wrote Secret Lives in the 90s, he had access to files from the MI5 and CIA which had been previously closed, to Lampman Sazasny, writing several decades before. However,
Wasserstein isn't prepared to say Rothschilds. Yet he does restate that sometime shortly after their marriage, Julie's wealthy Jewish family were raised to the nobility. Trebitsch was born in 1879, so we can feasibly put the marriage in the mid to late 1870s. The mid 1870s, at least, because Julie didn't have 6 boys only. She had a number of girls too. One report says Julie had 14 kids, another 16. 9 children survived. Trebitsch was her second surviving son. From the early 19th century, the Rothschilds families ran banks in Germany, Austria, Britain, France and Italy. In 1822, Salomon von Rothschild was made part of the Austrian nobility when he was awarded the hereditary title of Freiherr, Baron, by Emperor Francis II, the leader of the Habsburg Empire. According to Ivan T. Berend in History Detailed, Central and Eastern Europe in the long 19th century, credit institutions only came to Budapest in the 1840s. A national bank arrived in 1851, and a Rothschild bank arrived in 1867, and 3 more major banks in the next 4 years. Magyar is pretty much Hungarian for nobility and upper class, and I think a deal was done between the family of Trebitsch's mother and the Austro-Hungarian Rothschilds, perhaps business, perhaps marriage. I couldn't find a reference to Solomon Freund, but I did find Albert Solomon Anselm von Rothschild, one of Hungary's richest men, after the death of his father in 1874. In 1876, Albert Solomon married Baroness Bettina Caroline de Rothschild of France. Something I thought may have been exaggeration, but is very true. Often, the Rothschilds practiced endogamy, marrying their relatives to ensure the bank stayed in family hands. Albert Solomon's father-in-law married his cousin. Bettina came from Paris, where in 1824 a Betty Rothschild married her uncle James. I noticed a lot of males in the Austrian Rothschild line called Nathan, so it's even possible Trebitsch's parents were related. Is it? Before the 1895 crash, Nathan Trebitsch was wealthy. Lamp and Sazasny, who aren't citing sources, have it that Nathan Trebitsch shared his surname with the Moravian village that he came from, Trebitsch. It's now in Czechoslovakia. They go on to state that Nathan and 3 of Julie's male relatives traded on the Danube with 18 or 20 large barges, and they also owned practically an entire village in southern Hungary. Apparently Nathan was born in 1839 and Julie born in 1847. Now, I can only prove so much of this. But hey, Betty Rothschild and her uncle James, they had 4 sons and 1 daughter. So, when you're talking to your friends about the Watch Thief, tell them that we do incest just like Game of Thrones. The evidence against Trebitsch Rothschild, well, his brothers Lajos, Sandor and Joseph share those names leader heroes of the 1848 Hungarian Revolution, part of European uprisings which hit the Rothschilds hard and stirred up the first real anti-Rothschild sentiments which would just gather in the years ahead. So, if you were a Rothschild, why name your child Uncle Socks, Dada's a Dick, and Cousin Fucker? Secondly, we know Trebitsch's father shifted to investment banking later in his life. But when he lost all his money in the stock market, he was forced to endure hard times. So was Trebitsch a Rothschild? Verdict, well, perhaps. Was he inbred? Unprovable. And the incest theory only came to me while researching this video. Theory 2. Before London, young Trebitsch visited South America. My first source for several of these ideas is Dr. Richard Spence's article, including citations, The Mysteries of Trebitsch Lincoln, Conman, Spy, Counter-Initiate. It comes from New Dawn magazine, September 2009. Spence was a professor at the University of Idaho, teaching modern espionage, anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, history of secret societies, and the occult in history. We'll come back to Spence shortly. The story he cites here comes from historian Donald McCormick. McCormick was a popular author, writing about Jack the Ripper, the Hellfire Club, and rather extensively about spies. By the time he was 15 years old, Trebitsch was telling strangers of his trips to North and South America and the capitals of Europe. He was a drama student and undoubtedly putting these skills into the stories that began to circulate, and so he was advised to sell his tales to Budapest's newspapers, which he did. It wasn't unheard of for children as young as 5 or 6 to travel the oceans alone. Lamp and Sasasny state that at age 8, Trebitsch and his older brother were sent to study on the Austrian border, 200 kilometres away. I can buy that, but not that he'd crossed Europe and the equator. Fabricating these stories for the press? Most definitely. Remember, Trebitsch, as was his nom de plume, also claimed he had interviewed Thomas Edison. Wasserstein notes there is no independent corroboration of this story, but not so Spence's source, historian Donald McCormick. McCormick generally wrote about topics where information was scarce, sourcing from oral accounts, including gossip. After he passed on, his wife told an interviewer that Donald was pleased to never let facts get in the way of a good tale. Sounds like another Donald. Under the pseudonym Richard Deacon, he wrote A History of the British Secret Service in 1969, where he claims that Trebitsch travelled to South America and met a Welshman named Isaac Roberts, who shortly after introduced him to Lloyd George. The best known Welshman, called Isaac Roberts in those days, was an astronomer who was raised in North Wales in the 1830s. Then his family moved a teenager to Birkenhead, where he spent most of his life. Lloyd George, born 1863, represented North Wales in the 1880s, and there's no evidence that either of them visited South America. We could assume McCormick refers to a different Isaac Roberts. In 1865, a group of 200 advocates for Welsh independence emigrated to Patagonia in Argentina, the furthest tip of South America. They were ill-prepared and endured considerable hardship. 10 years later, the Argentinian government gave the settlers official title to the land, and they were joined by another 600 Welsh folk. Further migrations occurred from 1880 to 1887 and also 1904 to 1912. As for a London connection, Lloyd George had moved his law practice to the capital by the time Trebitsch arrived there in 1897. A pre-Roundtree meeting is at least plausible. McCormick has more to say on their connection, so let's come back to that in a while. My verdict on this one? McCormick lies a lot. Trebitsch lies a lot more. Trebitsch almost certainly did not visit South America as a boy, but hey, anything's possible. Theory 3. Trebitsch, as Anglican minister, became an occult initiate in Appledore, Kent. This theory was proposed by two Frenchmen. Firstly, Serge Houghton, writing in Invisible Rulers and Secret Societies, 1952. Houghton's work is about extraterrestrials and Atlantis, but mostly concerned with groups of occult and esoteric interest. The second is Jean Robin, writing in Hitler, the Dragon Elect, 1987. Robin is also interested in ETs and the Nazi occult, as well as eschatology, the study of end times events. He also specialised in the works of René Guénon, who we're going to meet later, and he was interested in anti-initiation manipulation. The story goes that as an Anglican curate in Appledore, Kent, 1905-1906, Trebitsch met an ex-Indian Army officer named Harold Beckett, who initiated him in continental occults. Beckett was well connected in European occult circles. He may have had a hand in introducing Trebitsch to the Freemasons, the Ordo Templi Orientis, and Chinese triads. Jean Robin builds on Houghton's claims, as cited here by Leon Lyon Zagami, detailing the secrets Beckett revealed. That there were, in each generation, only 72 true men. He may have intimated that Trebitsch was one of these, or have spurred him off in search of them. We know Trebitsch was tasked to theological readings a lot during this period, and it's plausible that he took his correspondence into an esoteric direction. A lot of the evidence for this theory is hearsay. Trebitsch was drawn to closed societies, the National Liberal Club and the Global Ambassador and spy networks. I can imagine a scenario of Trebitsch wanting to join the British Freemasons, and he certainly had the right contacts. We know he was drawn to mystic circles like the Theosophists and higher echelons of Buddhism. Typically, those groups welcome chameleons and pretenders. Was he connected to the triads? From 1921 to 1932, his alleged employers were the warlords Yang Sen and Wu Pei Fu. Both were involved in triad-type behaviour. Political corruption, money laundering, arms dealing, murder, assault, robbery and people trafficking. However, there is factual murkiness about this period. From 1941 to 1943, he hung out with pro-Japanese who had taken over triad interests, and in all places, Shanghai, a traditional triad base. As to regards the 72 true men, Houghton suggests they may or may not be the 72 unknown superiors. Of Buddhist lore, these creatures are largely conceptual. They also pop up in connection to the mystical Tibetan or Japanese occult order, the Green Dragons, who allegedly collaborated with Theosophical Society and the Thule Society. They influenced the well-known secular figures in Europe, travelled to the east to Tibet and Japan. It is claimed Rasputin and many leading Berlin Nazis were among them. Houghton and others claimed Trebitsch was in with the Green Dragons, though he was rarely placed in the areas where they were active. At its base, there is no evidence to support this theory. Houghton's original quotation of Harold Beckett, an ex-Indian army officer, has been parroted to pieces. Was Harold Beckett Indian or in the Indian Army, or was he going to be in the Indian Army? Appledore in 1905 had only 600 to 800 residents. Parishioners recall a fiery orator with a strong Hungarian accent. Trebitsch stuck out like a sore thumb in the tiny village. If there was an Indian, a second foreigner in Appledore, he would have surely been noticed. In fact, no source records Officer Harold Beckett anywhere at all in the time period outside Houghton's tale of him and Trebitsch. The only appearance is an Officer Harold Beckett serving in Burma along India's border in 1945. Meanwhile, Trebitsch has failed to gain entry to MI5 and the Theosophists. Even his placement as a Nazi agent is in doubt. Verdict? His links to Beckett and secret societies come from one or two conspiracy theorists who seem more interested in making a political point about elites rather than invoking firm biography or history science. Join me next time where I delve deeper into Trebitsch's links with Lloyd George, as well as Aleister Crowley and Adolf Hitler. All the conspiracies you can shake a stick at. This video has been brought to you by Patreon and my subscribers Peter Duncan, Miguel Soairo, Sean Duffield, Joan Carberry, Andrew Bolster, Phil Weir, Arslan Hyder Ali, James Gumble, Michael Daly, Linda Harley, John Robbins, David Annette, Richard Barr and Peter Hetman. You can find me at Andrew Luke on Twitter and various other jaunts around the web.